Psalm chapter 95 is where we'll be at this morning. This psalm is an invitation to worship. It was probably written by David, at least that's what the writer of Hebrews kind of alludes to, kind of tells us. It was written several hundred years before it was used in worship service. It was actually used in the Second Temple worship service, but David wrote this several hundred years. He actually even wrote it before the First Temple, so he wrote it several hundred years before it would be put into use. Now, if you remember, how did they get their Second Temple? Solomon's temple is destroyed. The Second Temple comes about when Nehemiah brings the people back over. They come back over. Nehemiah, Ezra, some of the other prophets there, they bring some of the people back. Nehemiah brings the people back, and what do? Their function is to work on the wall. They all work up on the wall around their houses, and each one does his own part. And then they get into the part where they are going to work on the temple. They begin just a little bit of work on the temple, on that Second Temple there. It's going to be called Zerubbabel's temple. They begin just a little bit of work on that Second Temple, and then the people quit. They just they quit working on the temple, and because they really become more focused on their own needs and their own homes, and they say, why work on the temple? Our own home isn't finished. We need to go work on our homes right now. So for the next 17 years, the temple is going to lay in really shambles and ruins and unfinished. But it is eventually finished, and it is repaired and restored. The people actually come back to finish the temple. So they did that, but it took them a number of years to get back to it. And in temple worship, Psalm 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, and 100, they were all used in worship at the temple, at the Second Temple. The first temple is Solomon's, like I said, and then you have Zerubbabel's temple, and then you have Herod's temple in the time of Jesus. But this psalm calls people to come to worship. And we know, or we should know, we should remember in our mind that when we come to worship, why do we sing songs? Why are there songs in worship? Why did David play a harp? Why is it mentioned? Why is there flutes that are mentioned? Why are other instruments mentioned in the Bible? Why are these things used? Worship ushers us into God's presence. You like a song? Sharon Future was just telling me about, I believe maybe last night or so, she went to see, I had mentioned, I believe last week we had sung How Great Thou Art. And I mentioned maybe about Elvis and how I enjoy his version of it. Well, Sharon said she went to see Terry Mike Jeffrey here recently, and he does a portion of music that is from Elvis Presley as well. And she says his version of How Great Thou Art is just fabulous. See, songs like that really usher us into the presence of God. It's one of the reasons we sing. We could come in here and I could just speak for 30 minutes and we could leave. But we sing songs to bring us, to usher us, to help us enter the presence of God. Maybe you have a favorite song that you like when it comes on the radio, or you put it in your CD player, or if you're still maybe you got records now. Maybe you got vinyl records and you've bought one of those. But you play these records or these CDs, this music, and it really prepares your heart for worship. It assists you to enter His presence. So this psalm is calling people to worship. But can we miss God in worship? We can. We can miss God in worship if we are preoccupied. We will miss God in worship by being preoccupied. It's just because you came to church today does not mean you will worship God while you're here. You can come into a church building, you can sit through song service. You can sit through an act of worship, act of tithing. You can see all this stuff go by past you, and you can see other people around you. You can see your neighbor worship, but you yourself can miss God even in church. Just because you came to church does not mean you're going to worship God. Everybody will worship something. No matter what our education is, no matter what our religion is, no matter what our social standing or social class in society is, everybody will worship something. And everybody has an altar in their life, and everybody has a throne in their life as well. The question is, what is on the throne of your life and what is on the altar of your life? The altar, if what is on the altar of your life means what have you sacrificed? What have you put down? What have you laid at God's feet? What have you gotten rid of that is preoccupying your mind or your thoughts at this very moment? Is self on the throne in your life? It's easy to identify self as on the throne because, we're more concerned about me, we're more concerned about recreation, we're more concerned about, maybe a party or an activity or something like that. We're more concerned. Self can be on the throne even when you're more concerned about a job or climbing a ladder than God's importance in your life. All of these things can sit on the throne of your life, of our lives. And when selfish desire is on the throne, that means you have sacrificed you. You're on the altar. You're on the altar to whatever sits on the throne in your life. So verse 1 and verse 2 here, Psalm 95. O come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before His presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to Him with psalms. So David writes this. We give credit to David for writing this, and 4 times right here in the first 2 verses, and he says it other times as well, but as you read through Psalm 95, but the 4 times right here in 2 verses he says, let us. Let us, let us, let us. So David continues this theme of let us. There must be some significance to David saying let us. God said let us. God said let us when He was talking to Jesus and the Holy Spirit. Let us make man in our image. So David says let us worship. God created man to worship Him. God did not create man to worship himself, and God did not create man to worship something else other than God. See, we all have a desire to worship something. Keep your finger there in Genesis 95 if you want to, Psalm 95, if you want to, and turn to Genesis chapter 11. I'm just going to look at a couple of verses here, but we all have a desire to worship something. And like I said, if your desire is of selfish motivation, then you're putting recreation, you're putting this or another one of yours upon the throne. You're going to sacrifice yourself and your relationship with God. That will be on the altar. And here's what happened here when the language was confused at this time after the flood, the Tower of Babel. You're familiar with this. But Genesis 11, verses 3 and 4. They said to one another, here we're going to see this word again, and we're going to see it in a different context. David has said, let us come together and worship. God has said, let us make man in our image. And man's design was to worship God, to have fellowship with God. But now we have these people after the flood. They're going to say to one another, come, let us make bricks. Let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used bricks for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. So now we have this another time these words are used, and they're saying, let us for our own selfish desire. God created us to worship Him, but it's often self that we worship. Come, let us make brick. Come, let us make something of ourselves. Let us do this so that we feel important, so that we feel prominence, so that we feel significance in our family, in culture, in the world today. Let us do this so that I can draw attention to me. So their motivation was not about worshiping God or doing something to let us worship God, to draw us closer to Him in some form of worship. Their intention for the let us come together was so that we can make something of ourselves. They had self on the throne. And we know what happened to them. But if you want to know, how would we ask, or what would we say? How does God call us? I want to know how to worship Him. How am I to be called to worship Him? How does God call me to worship Him? Well, He calls us to do it. There's a privacy of worship that we are called to. God calls us to worship Him privately. That would be one thing. God is going to call us privately to worship Him. You see, the very short time that you come in here on Sunday morning or Sunday night or a Wednesday evening, that you come in here for a devotion or for a message or for Sunday school or for just music and praise time, the very short time that you are in here for a service on a Sunday is not enough. You need to have a private time with God for yourself and Him, and it really needs to be daily. It needs to be a personal time with God daily and without distraction. So I don't believe you can worship God with the TV on or with the soap opera playing. I don't believe there needs to be no distraction time when you have time with God. And we're going to see this right here. Back in Psalm 63 right now. Still got your finger in Psalm 95. We'll be back there, but Psalm 63. There needs to be a personal time. God calls us to worship Him. He calls us to worship Him privately in a personal time. And this is what David says in Psalm 63, verse 6. When I remember you on my bed, I meditate on you in the night watches. So David is saying, before I drift off to sleep, before my eyes close and I begin to snore and I begin to drift off into la-la land there, he says, before I do that, God, my mind is on you. Think about that. What does your mind focus on before your mind? What you are thinking about when you go to sleep is the thing you will think about while you are asleep, and it's the very thing that you will wake up thinking about in the morning. So David says, before I go to sleep, I'm going to remember you on my bed. Now, how much more private can a person be than in their bed? You think about the most private thing in your house or in your life. You're going to say, well, the most private place or secluded place that I might have, bedroom. And then the bed in the bedroom there. So David says, there's this privacy in my worship or my fellowship of God. So before I drift off to sleep, God, my mind is on you. Verse 7 and 8. And then he says, I'm going to remember what you've done as my mind's on you. For you have been my help. So he remembers this. You've been my help through the day. God, you've provided, you've made way, you've made straight my path, you've assisted me. For you have been my help. And in the shadow of your wings I will sing for joy. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. David is saying, in the privacy of my bedroom, in the privacy of my bed here, he says, I'm going to spend time thinking upon your power, upon your goodness, upon your love for me. What do we do in our bed? In our bed, we might read a book. We might have a magazine or something there by a nightstand. We're reading that thing. And if we absolutely can't go to sleep, what do? Well, we all have a TV in our bedroom probably, so we turn that TV on and we let the TV play, and we're focused on the TV, and hopefully we'll drift off to sleep, watching the TV. I mean, probably many of you did that over your life. Maybe it was Johnny Carson you used to watch, or something like that, or the news. You might have watched the news as you went to sleep, but maybe you had that thing on just so you could go to sleep. See, David didn't have that in his day and time, did he? He didn't have that. It's a good thing that David didn't have an iPhone in his day and time or a smartphone, because what do we lay in bed doing now? We lay in bed swiping a screen in front of us. Moving it on, moving it up, moving it to the left, to the right. We worry about who has liked our post, who has shared our post, who has commented on our post, who has made some kind of interaction with us, through cyberspace there. That's what we're focused on. We're focused on, North Korea or China or this thing or that thing going on. But David says, in the privacy of my bed, I'm going to remember you. I'm going to meditate on you, for you have been my help. Your wings will shadow me. I will sing for joy because of you. I'm going to cling to you because your hand upholds me. So David says private worship is important. He says, let us. He continues to say, let us. So that let us would say, hey, corporate worship is important as well. Remember, he said that in Psalm 95. Let us. There should be a consistency in our coming together as brothers and sisters in worship at church. So there should be a private time. David says private worship of God is important. And then he says, because he's saying let us, and he says it so many times through Psalm 95, there must be something significant about us coming together and worshiping corporately as well. There needs to be both for there to be a whole. What you've done in private worship through the week you should bring with you to the corporate worship, and it should explode because you've had such a rich time of worship throughout the week. The service is completely different when that's the case. See, there is a reason that so many of us walk out of a service, this church, any other church in the world, at least in America. There is a reason that so many churchgoers walk out of a church service discontented or felt like it didn't do anything for them or it didn't mean anything for them. It's because they did nothing throughout the week to prepare themselves for Sunday morning. It's not your Sunday school teacher. It's not me. It's not the song that we sing. Well, that song just didn't move me today. The word just wasn't for me today. Let me ask you, what did you do the other 6 days of the week to prepare yourself for Sunday? We should bring something in here with us that just explodes on a Sunday morning. See, we get up on a Sunday morning, and if we feel like it, and there's nothing better for us to do, then we might come to church. But if the sun's out, or if it's raining, it doesn't really matter. If anything in between can distract us or take our eyes off of the need for coming together corporately, then we'll do that. The water's nice and calm on the lake. Ought to go. Ought to go out there. I can worship God in my boat. I can worship God, in the woods. I can worship God doing this, that, or the other thing. So David says, he continues to say, let us. But maybe you're the one sitting there, you know what, I need help. I need help with this worship thing during the week. David gives some information. David tells us what we can do. Verse 1, still in Psalm 95. He says, "O come, let us sing for joy to the Lord." This is the object. He says, "The Lord, let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation." He says, to the Lord, to the rock, our focus should be on Him. When we come in here and we come in here to service, we think, boy, I sure hope the music lifts me up. I sure hope there's a word that speaks to me today. I sure hope I get something out of the message. I hope something in the service takes this burden off of me. I hope somebody does something for me today. If that is you, who's the focus on? It's you. David says, sing for joy to who? David does not say sing for joy to you. David says sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Folks, we're here to worship Him. The only person that is an audience today is Him. He's the only one that is your audience today. The good thing is that when you worship Him, when you worship Jesus, when you worship the Father, think about this, it takes your mind off of you. Let us come before His presence with thanksgiving. So first thing David says, worship God. Sing joy to the Lord, the rock of your salvation. Be thankful that you have something to sing about. Let us come before His presence with thanksgiving. Let us shout joyfully to Him with psalms. See, let us shout joyfully. Let us come to His presence with thanksgiving. You don't have to come in here and say, oh, I'm such a wretched sinner. I can never enter His presence. I'm such a wretched sinner, He'll never hear me. You can come to His presence. You do not have to be apprehensive or you do not have to hesitate to come to Him. You can freely, matter of fact, Scripture says you can boldly come to the throne room. But see, if we're reluctant, if the devil has sold us some kind of lie that you are such a poor worm, a wretched worm like that you cannot come to Him with petitions and grievance and pain and distress and hurt and discomfort, if the devil has told you that, then you will miss God in worship. You miss Him every time if you're reluctant. Verse 3. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. He is a great God. He is a great King. He is above all gods. So we can be thankful for that. How am I to worship? How am I to worship God during the week? David says, you worship Him because He's a great God, because He's a King above all gods. We can worship God because Putin is not God. Amen, yeah. We can worship God because Kim Jong-un is not God. So see, you have reason to worship God because He is above all gods. He is above all men. See, you have a reason to worship. I'm not going to leave us out of it either, but you have a reason to worship God because your salvation, I hope, is secure in Jesus Christ. You have a reason to worship God because when you depart from this physical body into His eternal presence, you're not going to have to hear the words Congress again. Amen. Congress infuriates me. They make me sick. We don't have to hear that again. We can be thankful for His goodness. We can be thankful for His awesome power. Verse 4 and 5. In whose hand, this is rich, in whose hand are the depths of the earth? The peaks of the mountain are His also. The sea is His, for it was He who made it, and His hand formed the dry land. David says, in God's singular hand, in whose hand are the depths of the earth? The peaks of the mountain are His also. It says His singular hand. It doesn't say God's got a big backhoe up there in heaven with a big bucket on the end of it to carry all this He's created around with. It doesn't say there's a dump truck or some kind of wagon up there that He's got everything fenced off in. David says God's holding it in His hand. Not both hands, not a cup, not a bucket. In His hand. God is holding all of it in His hand. I wanted to look up, what's the depth of the earth in the ocean? There's a place called Mariana Trench. 35,858 feet deep is that trench in the ocean. Mount Everest at 29,000 feet above sea level. And where does God have that? It's in His hand, comfortably. If all of that of His creation is in His hand comfortably, do you not think that He can take care of you quite easily as well? That's good. See, you can be thankful for that. You're thankful that He's king above all gods, that there is nobody else appointed, a dictator, a ruler anywhere else on this planet or elected that is the king that you must answer to or that provides for you. And He's got it all in His hand as well. Your problem is not so big that God cannot fit it in His hand. Verse 6. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. See, we can miss Jesus if we do not understand worship. What does that mean? What do you mean we can miss Jesus if we do not understand worship? Let me read. Keep your finger there. No, we're done with Psalm 94. I think we're done. But Amos chapter 5. You'll want to see this. You'll want to see this right here. We will be back at Psalm 95. Amos chapter 5. What do you mean that we will miss Jesus if we don't understand worship? Amos chapter 5, verse 21. Now this is what happens, and this is depressing right here. I reject your festivals, nor do I delight in your solemn assemblies. See, God is saying, you're so preoccupied with other things that you pay me no attention. You're more preoccupied with what's going on the peripheral, and you've put yourself on the throne, you've put yourself in the place of prominence, and you're not even worshiping me. God says, I hate it, I reject it. I do not delight in your solemn assemblies when you're just worried about you. Verse 22. Even though you offer up to me burnt offerings and your grain offerings, I will not accept them. I will not even look at the peace offering of your fatlings. God says, hey, you've brought this offering to me. He says, you've passed the plate, you've put some money in, but I'm not going to accept it. You didn't do it with the right heart. You're more worried about what you're going to receive out of this. Verse 23, take away from me the noise of your song. I will not even listen to the sounds of your harps. He says, I don't even want to hear your music. I don't even want to hear your songs, your voices. I don't want to hear your singing or your instruments that are being played. Good gracious, why would God say something like that? Why would the prophet speak of that? Psalm 95, verse 10. This is why. For 40 years I loathed that generation and said, they are a people who err in their heart and they do not know my ways. God help us if He looks upon our worship and He sees or thinks or sees that we are doing something that says, God, it's only about me. God, I just want something for me. Did not they go grumbling off into the wilderness? Did not they want, you just brought us out here to die. We're hungry. We're sick and tired of eating manna. We're sick and tired of eating quail. Isn't there a good shrimp market or a lobster place or some crab cakes or some fried catfish available for us? Isn't there a good piece of steak handy? It's all about them. God help us if our worship is all about us and not about Him. Do we have a heart for worship? Is our heart in the right place? Or are we more concerned about our stomach growling because we're more concerned about what's for lunch than we are about meeting God in worship? See, God is looking for worshipers. Let us come together. God says, I desire for my creation to come together and worship me, to lift those songs, to lift those praises up to me, to bring that sweet aroma to His presence. He says, it's not about a style. There's many different styles, many different forms. God says it's not about a style, and it's not about how much money you give in worship. He says, I'm more concerned about your heart. And will you surrender your heart to me? To Him. See, if you don't surrender your heart, then it's your agenda. It's everything else that you've concocted in your mind that preoccupies your thought, and it's not about Him. God, I won't surrender that. So if there's something that you're not surrendering, then that is more than likely going to preoccupy your thought and replace where He should be. Even as a believer, we can miss Jesus when He passes by because our eyes are on something else. You may have seen or heard of things like this, but I've heard of things like this before, and I found a video on YouTube yesterday, and it was about it's a machine that was built, but it does nothing. This machine is a fabulous creation. I mean, it's amazing, but it does literally nothing. It works. It functions to keep itself going. That's all it does. Its movements keep itself going. It has gears galore on it. It has levers. It has arms. It has cams in it. It has pistons in it. It has square gears. It has oval gears. But it does all of this movement. When that thing starts, it has a little ball that rolls around it to keep something going up on top of it. And as all of it moves one other part. It is amazing to watch that thing work, but it does nothing. I hope God never looks down at you or me or us and says, they're extremely good at doing nothing, and they do it well. That machine was very good at doing what it did, but it did nothing. God, don't look down at me or you and say, boy, they're good at doing nothing, and they do it well. I'm going to ask you to bow your head. Go ahead and stand with me this morning if you would. We're going to have closing song here with your head bowed. Maybe your prayer this morning is, God, draw me into a closer worship time with you. Maybe you need to put a reminder even on your phone that says, hey, at 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 6 a.m. in the morning, I'm going to spend time with God. I'm going to give, how about 3 minutes? You got 3 minutes you can start with tonight. Just 3 minutes. David says, in the privacy of my own bed, I'm going to give you time, God. Maybe you want to put a sticky note on the back of your phone or on a table beside your bed. Give God the last 3. I pray that if you begin to give Him that 3, then that 3 will turn into 4, 5, and you'll see the difference in your life, and you'll see the difference on a Sunday morning too, when the place is ready to explode. Maybe you say, well, I've been involved in a lot of stuff. I've been active in a lot of things. And I don't want God to look at me and say, I'm just a machine that did nothing. I want to be at work where He calls me to. I want to serve where He has led me. Whatever prayer you might have this morning, intercession for another person, maybe just pouring your heart out to God. The altar is open. Be happy to pray with you. Let us sing this last song together. Amen.